steep driveway. It was up a steep driveway, and it was on a slope, and it could only be accessed by stairs on both sides. It had a separate toilet inside, and the size of the house was 99 square meters. It was a Lockwood house. So that might give you a little bit of a picture as to what it looks like. So pine walls all throughout, some carpeted flooring, a very boxed kind of design. But when I had my accident, which was 15 years ago, and I was at the Auckland Spinal Unit, I tried to stay in it for one night. And I got in for one night and I could just not live there. I couldn't access the toilet. I couldn't access the shower very well. It was over a bath, and I managed to survive one night, but it was pretty obvious even before we moved there that wasn't going to work out. And so it was a very traumatic time. My wife had to try and find a place for us to live. And the first place that she found, she got me to come and visit, and I couldn't get through the shower door. It was too narrow. And so after that time, she went out with a tape measure and had to measure the size of the door. My first wheelchair that I had was an old A3. For those who know about it, you see it on Shortland Street. It's the hospital model wheelchair that is quite wide and unwieldy. And it certainly didn't work for me in terms of housing. We eventually did find a place that we rented. And it wasn't ideal. I'll show you a slide a little bit later of the bathroom. But in two years' time, we had young children. They were then aged about 5 or 6. We had to find a place to live. And we sold our house and we had to look to find a place. And we looked and looked. By that stage, we're under ACC. And every place we looked, the bedroom I could access, but the kitchen was just not workable. The bathroom wasn't workable because the en-suites were very tiny. And the hallways were narrow. And we just came to the conclusion that if we could afford to build and have a house that was suited to my needs, we would. And we're very fortunate we had the assistance of family that's what we were able to do 13 years ago. So that's where we are now. It's a purpose-built house. It's 240 square meters. It's got 5 bedrooms. It's reasonably flat. It's single level, and I love it. So I recognize that I'm very fortunate to be in that position, but it's something that through that housing journey, I have learnt what are the different things that are important to disabled people in looking for a house. And a house, as we know, is by far and away the biggest purchase that we will ever make. And because of that, the number of criteria that we have in looking for a house are very quite complex. We have non-compensatory decision making that we have to make about our location, the price, the number of bedrooms. But when it comes to disability, there is so much more. Whether it's the bathroom, whether it's we need to have fences, whether we need to have space for our service dog to be able to go to the toilet, whether we need to have a safe space for our children with autism to be able to be so that we can observe them and keep them close to us. We have carers come into the home. Do we have space to store equipment? So many things that are not, we just cannot compensate over. And that's part of what makes it so tricky. So I'm just going to ask you, we're going to do the first poll. And the first poll is simply, who do I represent? It just gives us a little bit of a feel of who's actually here today in terms of whether you have a lived experience of disability, if you work for an organisation, and if you have family or whānau that you care for. Clearly, I tick all 3 of those boxes, but it would be good for us to know. So, Carol, if you're able to share the poll, that would be great. The first poll.
I think you've got the polls, Mike.
Oh, I've got the polls.
Can you see? Oh, okay. It's all right. I can put it up. I'll do it. Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Can everybody see it?
So they are anonymous. It just gives us a percentage of who's here and helps me.
Are we done? Can you see it, Mike?
I can't see it, no.
Okay.
Is the result from the poll? Yeah.
I'll read it out.
That's great.
We have 19% of people here are disabled people or a person with a disability. 89% are family members or carers of disabled people. And 30% are from organizations or the community.
Wow, it's a really good mix. Thank you so much. So welcome everyone again. Some years ago, we did some research into housing as part of our community housing collective, which Disability Connect leads. And one of the people that I got to interview through that is this lady here, Joan. I should say I'm just using non-diplumes. That's not her real name. Joan is estranged from her family and she lives alone. She's aged over 65, I'll put that delicately. She's lived in a Kaiongora home for over 15 years, and the house is literally rotting away, as she describes it. No one seems to be concerned about the state of the house. She has chronic health conditions, so she's had both shoulders replaced, and reaching anything up high or down low is incredibly difficult. She has carers that help her with meals, dishes, vacuuming, laundry, cleaning, shopping, personal cares, changing light bulbs, and opening containers, among many other things. She doesn't drive a car, so she's reliant on other services to be able to do what she does during the week. Heating is an issue for her in her home, and when a smoke alarm goes off, she can't turn it off. And she feels very insecure in her home. She's had someone turn up to her door with a baseball bat in their hand, threatening her. She's had tradespeople turn up at odd hours. So she doesn't feel very secure where she lives. But she does love a garden. It's just that it's not very accessible to her. She's quite happy living with support, but she's worried that as she ages, the home's not going to be right for her. She's going to need a wet area bathroom. She knows that that could be put in, but it could be some time before that actually happens. So a house is actually more than a place. If you listen to that story, listen to her about her life. She has trouble getting down to the letterbox to actually to get the mail, and then even opening the mail is a challenge. To be able to live in her home, if she drops something or something is in one of the corners of her house or it's up high, she has to wait for a carer to come in to be able to do that. So a house is actually more than a place. So I've got a question for you. What is a house to you? It's an open-ended one, so you can write what you like in there, but what actually is a house to you? You can put a few words or a sentence, whatever it is, but that's the poll. What is a house to you? Speaking a lot of variety in the answers. Carol, I don't know if we're going to be able to share them. I hope we can, so people can see them.
Are we done? Any more? I think we're done.
There we go.
Okay, so
I've
we
shared the results. Are people able to see that?
do you want me to read some of the results out?
Yes, you might have to read those out.
Okay.
I've shared them, but
We've got a house should be a safe, comfortable place, a safe place where I can relax, a place to be myself, a place to meet my friends, somewhere to do creative work, a place to take time away from community pressures, a place to recuperate, a safe place, a sanctuary, a private space to safely be me and to feel secure and wanted by my community, a place of safety and warmth. They're mostly in the same vein, pretty much in the same vein, Mike.
yeah. No, that's really great. And I thank you for everyone who's contributed that way. I think it's really interesting that there's even a cultural dimension around it. It's interesting if you think of Te Ao Māori, ahikaroa, the idea of keeping it lit, which I'll touch on, whanangatanga, manakatanga, katahitanga, the whole idea of it being a shared space, one that we live in, that is a place of belonging. Kaitiakitanga, it's a place of renewal. A lady that I spoke to not long ago with a disability was just feeling awful because the house that she was living was not by water, and that was so important to her. To me, a home, it's a home. Kāinga, home. It's not a house. Kāinga ora tend to think in terms of the assets as the physical assets and a house. As much as the name says kāinga ora, it is a home, it is kāinga, it is a life. And if you look at the two options here, we've got it is choices. It is having the choice in terms of people visiting. Someone mentioned that before, for transportation, to be able to do activities like my art or whatever it might be. It is a journey. We go through life stages. So the life stage when I bought my first house and the life stage where we went renting and then eventually built a house, that was some time ago. Now I'm thinking about retirement and what is that? So it changes. Ahikaroa is more about intergenerational living in some ways. Are you in the same place where you were born, where you hope to actually live out your days? Are you connected to a space and a place that is forever? Individualized, I talked about all the criteria before. Interdependence, I'll touch on that before, but it's about having permission to ask for help when we need it. Partnership, whether it's with whānau, with an agency or a provider, with other people. It is that sense. Having supports to assist us with what is too difficult or is impossible, as in the case of Joan. It's about healthy well-being. Here you can see a picture of a vehicle. And that picture, the person who owns that vehicle, Thomas, that's where he lived for 20 years. He may still be living there. He was part of our housing research. He had myalgic encephalomyelitis, known as ME. I can't pronounce it very well, but there was nowhere else he could live. He had memory loss. It was impossible to live in a place that wasn't creating havoc around his allergies. He had toxic reactions. He really needs a place that is eco-friendly. But the biggest problem was affordability. He had the money, but he couldn't find anything that met all his conditions in an older rural town, an older house in a rural town that would meet his needs. So thinking about our healthy well-being, that sometimes our houses, like Jones is rotting away, our houses can also be detrimental to our health. So they should be about a place of healthy well-being. The house that I live in, as new as it is, plays havoc with my allergies. And I'm going through desensitization for that at the moment. It's not actually that creating wellness for me. I need to get it deep cleaned. There's all sorts of things that happen. And so over time, our houses change in terms of whether they're providing that well-being. But community, I love that notion of community people talked about, because it's more than just being able to access our community. It's more than just inclusion. Living in community is about being missed if we're not there. You know, we did some research in housing some time ago, as I mentioned, and I had a group of people from disability organisations and the community in one room, and I said, describe your house, your kāinga, and tell me what it's like. And I described my house and how easy it was for me to live there. No one else's house was suitable for me to visit. It had steps up. It had a bathroom that I couldn't use if I visited. My children, when they were growing up, I could not visit another person's house because of the steps, because I couldn't use the bathroom, because I couldn't actually get out onto the driveway. And so I actually was missing from community as my children were growing up, because we didn't have accessible houses in our community. And so when you look at what it is not, that bottom one there is segregation. When I see 3-level houses under the building code, they do not have a lift. So if you've got families living on the 3rd level, I can't visit. If you have a health condition and you're on the 3rd floor, you're less likely to go and do your shopping or to go and visit or engage with other people. So to me, that is segregation. That is not a home. That is not a life. It's not a bed. Institutions talk about beds. Hotels and motels talk about beds. The frustration that I experience and others with physical disability especially experience in finding accommodation because they say it's accessible, but it's not. A development is not a life. Independence, as much as we strive to live alone and to be able to, like Joan, to be fully independent, that's not a home and a life. We do actually need people, and I'll touch on that shortly in a bit more detail. It's not an institution. You know, the United Nations Convention is now drawing us to a point where we're no longer wanting to live in institutions. That is not healthy. We know from the inquiry into abuse in state care that institutions are not places of safety. And so living in the community is so much more important. It's not a program. A program, again, is not giving us choices. It's telling us we have to be here at a certain time and to do things at a certain time. It's not mana enhancing. It's not empowering. We find that if you're in a home and you are limited, as Joan is, in terms of what she can do and when she can do it, waiting for a tradesperson to come and to fix it or to do repairs. Yes, we are all in that boat, but when you can't fix it yourself and you can't change your own light bulbs, you've got to find some way around that. And it's draining. I know from the people that I've talked to, we do provide occasionally housing advocacy for individuals and families in Auckland. We get referrals to be able to help to navigate. That's part of what I'm sharing today, some of the things that I've learned. It's not suitable and it's not helpful. I think if you look at these things on the left-hand side, if I was going to sum it up, I'd say it's flourishing and it's nourishing. That's the left-hand side, flourishing and nourishing. On the right-hand side, it's isolation, it's loneliness, and it's limitation. And so that's how I define those two sets. And hopefully you get a sense of that in terms of where you're living. Is it a place that is flourishing and nourishing, or is it a place of isolation, loneliness, and limitation? So when we're looking at our housing, we're thinking about our housing. I think the very first place to be is, what is your vision? So many people say, I'm looking for this. This is what I'm thinking about. And they're thinking about in concrete terms, where they want to live, which is true. If you look at the survey on stuff that was out this morning, over 60% of people said that location was the first thing they think of. And that's true, but what is your vision around your life and where you want to live? Not just about your house. Think about your vision. What do you enjoy? What does your life look like? Think about the changes and different stages for yourself, for your family member. Is it intergenerational living, or is it living at home with supports, or is it living in community? What is your vision? What would be your dream? What does that look like? And this whole thing of interdependence, it's recognizing that we all need to give permission to ask for help, and we need to work as a team to be able to live. There's a movie with Tom Hanks playing as Castaway, living on an island, and he dropped out of the sky and he was living by himself on this island. Even he needed Wilson. Even he needed someone to be able to talk to and to work through things with. We all require help from someone. Yes, it's great that you want to be independent, and I'm as independent as anyone, but I recognize there are things I cannot do and I should not be doing in terms of safety and health. And so this whole thing about interdependence is not the independent side, which is more, independence is the goal of self-sufficiency. The wrong thing for me to say to my daughters is, when are you going to leave home? Because if you have autism, if you have dyslexia, it's a judgment call from me as a dad. That's not the best thing I can do. It's pushing them more towards isolation and loneliness. The best thing I can do is actually find a way to nurture and support and say, look, you've done so well at being able to fold your washing, or you're doing so well at being able to cook. Now let's look at how you can manage to pay your bills. How can we find ways for you to be able to, what are some things we can work on there? How can I help you? So it is that whole interdependence as opposed to an independence model, which is not healthy long term. I talked about integration here, not segregation, being able to be part of integrated lives with other people, within your community, with people who live in the same building or live in your neighborhood. Do you know your neighborhood? Are you in a neighborhood where people know you and care for you? I have someone who calls me if I'm not in church on a Sunday, because I used to flat with him, and we have that connection, and that's wonderful for me. And I've told him often, this is fantastic. Don't stop. Who do you want to live with is a really important question. In some cases, you might want to live alone. That's fine. But knowing who you want to live with is an important part of your vision for who you like. What type of people? People your own age. How will you pay for the house? How will you pay for the food, for the insurance? These are all questions that we need to be thinking through as part of our vision. And what staff and what support are needed to be able to give us that assistance. We can see Martine there with her dog. Martine is her real name. She's given me permission. But for her, and Wesley at the time, being able to navigate life, what does she want to do that's independent, and what does she need to do that she can navigate to be able to find the bus stop, to be able to use it, to be able to get to where she needs to go. This is all part of our vision for life and what it looks like, and what my needs are for Wesley as a place to be able to go to the toilet or anything like that. So I'll move from there. Hopefully you've made some notes as we've gone. A good place to start then, once you've got a vision, is a one-page housing plan that looks at 4 questions. And I find that these 4 questions are really integral to us having a good plan. You'll see this with a lot of planning. It's finding out, what do we know before we take action? And you can see the picture there is actually from a family who also did research with us. The dad's name, not his real name, is Aziz. You can pick up from the name that he's from the Middle East. And he had two daughters. He has a son and a daughter, and he's now got another son. But his oldest daughter, Jana, had very high level needs, the most high level needs I've ever seen. The house was actually killing her. She had vitamin D deficiency. They could not take her outside. The bathroom was terrible. There were leaks in the home. It was an awful, awful housing situation. Her showering equipment was stored in the garage, which was outside, and the ramp that it went up was just incomplete. It was heartbreaking for me to hear their story. When you think about what is important to you, to me, you should be able to think about things that are like, well, maybe actually you can add some of that down yourselves. I think we've got a poll that's coming up. What is important to you? Rather than me talk about it, you can think about it. What is important to you? We know that location is generally an important thing. I know you've talked about some things about what home is to you, but think about the other aspects of your life that are really important about where you live or what you live in. So have a go at the question. What is important to me? Just while that's going on, I will actually talk about some of the things that are important to me, and whether it spurs things off, it doesn't matter. But geographically, being close to family. You know, my brother-in-law's in the South Island. We're going to have to move there at some point. My work and the commute, whether I can commute and travel. The hospital, when we bought our first place, it had to be close for me to the spinal unit. That was one of my criteria. The shops, being able, if that's a place that you go regularly and your access close to a pharmacy or a doctor's. Water, as I mentioned before, the lady who said that why it was just would give her life, that being close to water is so important. A place that is clean, particularly for those who've got not just allergies, but any condition, a health condition. Being able to be in community, a place where we're known and we're loved and people know us is really important. So often that location part is really important. We'll let that run just for a little bit, but that was what is important to me as opposed to what is important for me. And especially we've got a lot of people who are family and whānau. What is important for me? And you're thinking about your loved ones. I'm thinking about my brother-in-law. I'm thinking about my daughters. Safety, the hospital, carers, equipment. To be able to live my life, I need equipment. Maybe it's a service animal. Maybe it's a kitchen. Maybe it's a laundry. Maybe I need a place to age well, to adapt as I keep living. You know, the bigger part of our dream, that's part of our one house plan. So the difference between what is important to me and what is important for me, and especially when you have a family member who may be non-verbal or perhaps doesn't have that capacity, I think it's still very useful to be able to do, and we have ways to do that. And to try and find that out, you know, a good question to ask is, how does my loved one communicate with their behavior? In the mornings, when they struggle to get out of bed, I think it means they haven't had enough sleep. So what I should be doing is let them sleep longer, leave them for an hour, and then to come back. So thinking about how, for those who are non-verbal, how do they actually communicate with their behavior, what they like or don't like? We can still do this for people who are non-verbal, who have limited agency. And I'd encourage you in that space to still put together a one-page housing plan. Think through what people like about me. Am I a people person? Do I have a sense of humor? Am I honest? Well, and reliable? Is my cooking okay? Or do I need someone else to cook for me? Am I quiet? People like that about me. all those things. You know, again, who I'm going to live with, and especially when we're thinking about our family members, think about what do people like about our loved ones. And then the last one, how am I best supported with nursing, cleaning, cares, support to go to the gym, travel, eating, so many things that we can think of. So that's all part of the one-page plan. I don't know, Carol, can you share some of the things in the one-page housing plan? Was there anything that's there that we can share? I can't hear you, Carol. You've got your mute, I think, Carol.
Mute. I know, but I have to change onto a different
Okay.
screen to see that at the same time. So we've got what is important to me: being close to family and public transport, close to work and shops, reliable caregivers, able to accommodate a pet, having people around me, not being alone, outdoor space, views, near public transport, good neighbours, safe, the interdependence living you mentioned, independent access into and out of my home at all time, to be warm and safe with carer access, easy but secure, being close to family, eating fresh from the land, growing food, being close to nature for healthy well-being. I like that one. I think we all need that. There are lots more.
No, that's great. It just gives me a bit of a sense of what people are thinking about. I mean, it is that, kaitiakitanga. I mean, it's that care for the land, and that the land nurtures and refreshes us. You know, ukaipotanga is another part. You know, it's a place that I get energy from, and having a place that does that, that should be part of our dream, I think, and we need to be able to express that, especially when we're looking or we're relying on someone else to provide housing for us. I'm going to move on. Just look at planning tools just very quickly. There's lots of different planning tools. They have different ways and means. If you're going to get someone else to come and do it for you, they may take you through some of these. Especially for those of us who've got family and whānau, thinking about the circles of support. These are the people who are interested and involved in our lives, and actually having a plan around that. Building up a network of people who are able to assist us to reach our goals and be engaged in community. Usually we start with parents and siblings and other close family and friends, but over time this expands so that when I'm no longer here, there is someone who's caring for my children or providing for them. And that's part of that whole notion of circles of support. Path planning, which is planning alternative tomorrows with hope. It's a process of discovery to help individuals and whānau to create an individual vision, which is a little bit like what we've already done. But when your child maybe is not so good at being able to express, or they need some help, it's worthwhile looking at this. It's expensive. You can use your individualized funding or your personal budget to be able to pay for it, but it gives you a visual plan that's usually 5 years long that helps them to be guided in terms of what they're doing and where they're going. And it is helpful in that. The Charting the Life's course is very similar. It was originally developed in the States for developmental delay. You can look it up. It's about using individual strengths, technology, relationships, and community to help families to plan through life stages. So it's not just thinking about the next 5 years, but it's thinking longer term than that. And what I like about that, it does talk about what do we not want. And I think we're actually very good at picking out what we don't want. And sometimes that's the easier thing to start with, is what we don't want, to make a list of what we don't want. And it often, when people are looking at Charting Life's course, they often start with that. What do we not want versus what do we do want? And it kind of helps us to figure that out. So I'm not going to say much more than that. It's a very quick slide, but it just gives us a bit of an idea in terms of what we do want. If you see that gate there, you know, are people able to access the home, being able to get in and out independently? But when you have children with autism, that might be exactly what you need to be able to keep the children in, as much as it is to be able to keep your pets in. Next slide. Well, this is the bathroom that I was in for 2 years. And for those of us who have paraplegia, you might look at that and go, oh, really? Yes, I was lucky to get that demo and to be able to sit over the toilet, but then I'd have to transfer off onto a shower bench next door to that, and I could not shut the shower door. So every day and every morning I was in that bathroom for an hour and a half to 2 hours, because that's how long my toileting would take. And the water would go everywhere and I'm very sorry to the landlord, it would go out and it would flood the carpet, because that's what I needed to live in. And the challenges in life, my goodness, well, what is accessible? I've got a saying, just because it says accessible, looks accessible, and smells accessible, doesn't make it accessible. Say it again. Just because it says accessible, looks accessible, and smells accessible, doesn't make it accessible, particularly when you're looking at accommodation or at somewhere where you've never stayed before, you're staying with family. What is accessible is actually a little bit different to everyone else, even though we have LifeMark building standards, which is really great. Recently, I've been in a Kaiongera set of housing, new housing that was accessible. Well, we told it's accessible for wheelchairs. They had carpets with 3 mil underlay. Well, I can tell you as someone who uses a wheelchair, if you've got 3 mil underlay, your wheelchair just sits, it doesn't move. Please use commercial underlay, 2 mil. It makes it so much easier to get around. The bedroom had no cavity sliders in the closets. That means the door has to open out and you can't get around it. So all sorts of things like that. But the kilt and the bathroom was too small for Pacifica caregivers. You know, it says it's accessible, but actually it wasn't. It had some nice features. It had one of those automatic those kitchen benches that you could change the height on. It had vinyl wood plank flooring for the kitchen only, and the bathroom. It had side opening oven door and adjustable height benches, but it wasn't completely accessible. The building code, well, we know, and some experts I'm sure that are even joining us today, 1 in 12. Yes, that's the ramp height, but 1 in 14, 1 in 17 is really much better for those of us who have to move up and down them. The cross slope of things, you know, at 2 degrees or less would be much better than the standard. And we often see more guidelines than standards, which means people have a choice as to how they implement it, which doesn't make it that accessible. Modifications. Well, between the Ministry of Health, ACC, doing it yourself, involving your occupational therapist, it's quite challenging to get modifications done. Joan was waiting for an awful long time to get modifications done in her house, and I've been there when you're renting. It's not possible to get those modifications done always. The lack of suitable choices, and we've covered a lot of these already about the things that we don't have a choice over, but we often, you compromise, don't you? But that's part of the challenge. Density, don't get me started about medium versus high density. Medium density meaning you can build up to 3 levels on a site. But as I've said before, the building code says, well, up to 3 levels, you don't have to have a lift unless you've got 50 people living on the 3rd floor. Once you're over 3 levels, so 4 levels and above, it's looked at as high density. You do have to have a lift by law. And so when I see something that's 4 levels, I immediately know I can get in it. When it's 3 levels, I'm not sure. And so density housing, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's accessible either. It just means if it's over 4 levels, I know there's a lift. LifeMark standards, they're based on the whole building, not just 1 or 2 apartments. So for the LifeMark standard, if you see a building complex and it says that it's level 5, that means it's wheelchair accessible for the whole building. Okay, level 3 is a slightly lower level of access, and level 4 as well. There's different levels, and it goes right up, I believe, to level 9, which is an almost impossible standard to have. But there are LifeMark standards. You can look them up on their website, and it explains what they are in terms of access when you're building a home or you're deciding whether you can access it or not. The last one's really important, is time to look. We just do not get time to look. And I do have a poll here. Carol, you might want to put that poll up. You know, what are your challenges when it comes to housing? What are the things that you find challenging the housing space more than that, but I find that time to look is pretty near the top for most of us. To be able to work through a plan, to be able to navigate carers, to be able to look is so hard and so challenging. And to find someone to help you as well. So even if you can just note your top 3 challenges, what they might be, just with a few words, that would be great. Just gives us a sense of what we're going to be talking about or facing. When we were doing our housing research a couple of years ago, it was just in the midst of COVID, I did a focus group with people from the spinal community based in Kirikiriroa and Hamilton. And one of the respondents said, even if I could find a house that was suitable to my needs, I couldn't afford it. Affordability is typically our big thing. I think we'll just let that run just for the sake of time, but we can come back and look at it once we've looked at options, I think, Carol. That's okay. So what are our options when we're looking at housing? And the photo that's there is a picture of a long driveway. It's got multiple houses on it. It's not co-housing, it's actually social housing. It's on a slight uphill slope. You can see cars parked there. What I like about it is that at least you get to know your neighbours. You're in an environment there, but equally you've got the challenge of if there's neighbours who are not particularly neighbourly or helpful. They're not people who are there by choice. They're there because this is one of their last remaining choices in many ways when it's social housing. But it gives us some idea again of the different types of housing that are around. And if you look at the options, privately owned, by far, in a way, most New Zealanders live in privately owned housing. It's 64% of New Zealanders live in a house that they themselves own or have ownership of. That's declining. But that gives some security. You know, you don't have to move. You don't have a landlord who's telling you to move. It gives you security. And generally, it gives you better outcomes. So the more people we can find privately owned housing for and security of tenure, the better. Renting is 28% of the population are renting or flatting. So, and that could be, flatting, it could be a shared rental. On our website, Disability Connect's website, we have 4Go Flatting. It's a handbook of 4 young people who decided they want to go flatting. They're people with disabilities, and it takes you through the journey that they went through. Co-housing is a really interesting one. There's a couple of models that are around now. Earthsong here in Auckland, Co-house down in Hamilton, I think it is, or it might be Christchurch, and Peterborough, which is in Christchurch. It's where people are actually buying into a larger site. It's got shared spaces. And for a lot of our whānau, particularly with autism or disabled people, this is something that people are talking about a lot more. But getting there is a bit more of a challenge. Being in a space where there are other people, some with disabilities, some without, with some shared spaces, it's not the same as having an apartment building which has a communal space, that don't have stairs so you can visit other people. This is actually where you can visit, but you've got your own private space within that. And when I share the presentation, you can see some links to those, but there's Earthsong, Co-house, and Peterborough. There was Awhi up in Whangarei, but I believe that's not going ahead now. Social housing. It's supported by government subsidies. There's 18,500 homes in New Zealand that are offering social housing. And that could be through it's more through a private provider than necessarily Kāinga Ora, which has 67,000 homes, and that's at June 2023. Again, these are spaces which are shared. There are currently 24,417, and that again was using June statistics, on the housing register. So that's people who are currently not in public housing, but who've been assessed as being eligible for it and are ready to be assessed, matched to a suitable property. So it could be because they can no longer afford a rental property, they've had a relationship breakup, there's something happened to their circumstances that they're now looking for social housing. So they're on the housing register, which is maintained by MSD, the Ministry of Social Development. There's also a transfer register for applicants who are already in public housing and need to be rehoused. And there's 5,028 applicants who are in that space. So just because we've got a house doesn't mean to say it's suitable for us. And then, of course, you've got community group homes, which is a form of living model, which we'll touch on shortly. There's 1,522 households who are community group homes in New Zealand. Housing and urban development, they also provide transitional housing, which is temporary housing, which is made available for people who are in between rentals or temporary needing a home before they move into either social housing or into a Kāinga Ora home. And WINZ also has emergency housing, which is temporary housing made available to people who can't access transitional housing. And there's another 3,400 of those. So we can hear that there's a real housing crisis that's going on at the moment for our disabled people and our family and whānau. Let's see, hopefully Lisa's available. Is she available? Have we heard anything there, Carol? She's going to just take us through living models.
I've sent her a message, but I'm not sure if she hasn't responded.
Hello.
Oh, she's here. Oh,
I'm back.
Right.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. So I'm just going to present this slide briefly on living models. So what we mean by living models are the type of funded and, to an extent, non-funded supports that a person might need to live in the home of their choice, or the home that they have. So if that's a fantastic photo of my son there, very handsome man, probably the most handsome man you're ever going to see in your life, but that's, I'm not biased in any way. In terms of, so we'll start with residential care. Residential care is a full 24/7 year-round support. It is for people with quite high needs. There are residential providers who specialise in physical disability and those who specialise more in intellectual disability, but also those who cater for people who might have both types of disabilities, and of course, dual disabilities with other mental health conditions and so on. So there's a variety of contractors out there, and they are contracted by Whaikaha, Ministry of Disabled People, to provide this 24/7 support. Now, the homes are located in the community. The idea is that they look like any other home in the community. They don't sort of have 8-foot-high fences or anything of that nature. The idea is that they look like any other home, and the person is in the community and practices in the community as far as practicable. So to access residential care funding, it's for people over the age of 16, and it requires an assessment from your Needs Assessment Service Coordination Agency. There is quite a wait list for residential care in New Zealand, whether it's in a city or in a smaller provincial area, there are wait lists. And people are matched into residential care in a way that will fit best with the particular house. So what I mean by that is that there might be a group of 3 young men who are sort of all under the age of 30, might have sort of perhaps similar disabilities, and so the Needs Assessment Agency would be wanting to match another person who would be a good fit in that home. So it's not necessarily a case of who's at the top of the wait list is the next person to get a placement there. So then if we move on to talking a little bit about supported independent living, again, this is assessed by your Needs Assessment Service Coordination Agency. Supported independent living is not is not 24/7 support. It is where the person has good basic skills of semi-independent living, but they need assistance with some aspects of that. Now, it might need that they need assistance with budgeting or assistance when they go to the supermarket to perhaps, buy some groceries. Or they might need assistance at the end of the day when it's 7 p.m. and the sun is low and the curtains need to be pulled, and make sure that, the person's had a good, decent evening meal, and that, the oven's turned off, all of that type of thing. So, and again, it's through your needs assessment service coordination agency. Choice and community living is a model. It's relatively new. It's actually been running for several years now. But choice and community living is available in Auckland. It's an alternative to residential care, and it was developed for people who do have high needs, who would otherwise be perhaps on an avenue towards residential care. But choice and community living is where supports are put in. It's certainly not necessarily a 24/7 support, but supports are brought into the home, and the disabled person and or their family find their own home. So whether that's ownership or renting a home, or perhaps a social housing, kāinga ora housing, but the responsibility is on the disabled person and their family to find the accommodation. There can be some assistance with that. There are agencies who will host a choice and community living model, and they can help to source housing, but ultimately the responsibility sits with the disabled person. It's not 24/7 support. So there is, if you like, some degree of dependence on freely given support. That might be from family, whānau, friends, relatives, and so forth, to perhaps provide some hours of support over the course of that 24-hour period, to sort of, if you like, make the budget work, and to involve more inclusion in the community, more connection with other people. And family governed models are based on individualised funding. So again, to obtain individualised funding, one would need to approach one's needs assessment service coordination agency and talk through that you're looking at a family governed model in order to achieve a sufficient level of funding based on the needs of the disabled person that will support them to live in a family governed model. There are some very good examples of this. I know the chairperson of Disability Connect, Colleen Brown, has a model which has been set up for many years in the booklet and video footage called 4Go Flatting, demonstrates this, and I'm sure that's still available on the Disability Connect website there. But again, family governed models depend on the disabled person and or their family whānau obtaining the property, again, through ownership, renting, social housing, however that might look. And then the family or collective of families employs support workers directly. That's the common way that a family governed model is delivered. They employ support workers directly, so they're fully in charge of the people that they're employing and the rosters and the lifestyle that the person lives in that environment. And it obviously it comes with a level of responsibility, but coupled with that responsibility is huge choice and control actually over that environment. So there's a very, very brief rundown on those four options there. I used to deliver an entire 2-hour seminar on this topic, so I've just given you a very nutshell version. But yeah, so I will hand back over to Mike now. I'm certainly available if anybody does want to contact me with any questions on this, and I can supply you with my contact details. Sorry, I'm in a rather noisy hospital environment here, but I'll hand back over to Mike now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you so much for being available to come and see us at this time. It's really good. I would just point out, just to move to the next slide, with Whaikaha, My Home, My Choice is a program that Whaikaha has to actively change the way people are supported so they can live everyday lives in the community. And they actually have some online conversations starting next week. If you go through the Whaikaha website or through your disability information provider, they will be able to connect you with those, I'm sure. So there's online conversations beginning next week just around my home, my choice. Carol, I don't know, what was that last poll like? The choices.
Okay, okay, let's have a look. We have not knowing where to even start, who to approach, how to get financial help. Another one is time, finding the time, finding reliable tradespeople, money for upkeep of my house, and a safe bathroom. There is not a single site to go to that will show you accessible options that might be available. You're effectively looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yep.
Yeah,
True.
so I think that's...
Yeah, it's one of the, in Victoria and Australia, they do have a database that does help you to be able to find an accessible home. It's something I'd love to see happen here. Just going back to that Whaikaha one, I know the reference there is whaikaha.government.nz support and services. If you're looking for the My Homes, My Choice conversations next week, it's under news and events, and then it's got My Home, My Choice project seeking conversations with family and whānau to look that up. But other places you can look at, Te Whatu Ora, for those who are under Ministry of Health, they have information there about supports too for living in the community, particularly if you're over 65, you come under, more likely to be under Te Whatu Ora, but also if you've got a particular health condition, that you'd be available to get supports that way too. Your NASC, which of course differs around the country, the Needs Assessment Service Coordinator, every part of the country has one. The Federation of Disability Information Centres, of course, do look at that. Community Housing Aotearoa, if you're looking for a house, there's a lot of community providers who are providing housing, not necessarily accessible, but some of them do offer that. And it's worth looking at them if that's in a location where you're looking to live, to see what options they have. Kaiongo as well. In general, if you are on the waiting list, and so you're on the waiting list to be able to get a house, you're on the housing register, you'll have a rating that's either A, B, or C, A being the highest rating. And if you're rated between A16 and A20, you're at the top of the list. So there you're more likely to be able to find a home. We're able to help people in Auckland. We have a way to be able to contact them if your rating is A16 or higher, to find someone at Kaiongo to see if we can have you move into a house that is reasonably new, that's just come on stream. It's just a way that the system can work. Not ideal, but it is part of the way the system does work. The other thing I'd mention here is our Community Housing Collective. We advocate for the voice of disabled people and their families, and it's from the community. The community told us that we need housing for disabled people, that the people who come to the community looking for help, most often who have difficulties, are people who are looking for something that's accessible, who are looking for something that actually meets their needs. And so out of that, we do advocate. Complex Care Group is a proud member of our Community Housing Collective as well, but it's disability organisations as well as community organisations. There's a hui that's there. The research that we've done, you can see that we run forums, and we've got some ongoing ones. If you would like to be participating in these ongoing forums, either join up to Disability Connect, it's free, you get our emails, or send us an email to admin@disabilityconnect.org.nz and say you'd like to be part of the Housing Zoom support. We're looking to do one coming up shortly on choices in community living. There'll be a range of different topics, but it's just helping people to work through the different options that there are as well and being connected in that space. So that's something that we offer. But that actually brings us to the end of our presentation. I've tried to cover as much as I can, not necessarily everything. There's more in my head and Lisa's as well, I know. But it's time to be able to stop and to be able to answer some of your questions. So thank you so much for being with us all this way. hopefully you found it useful and helpful. We're here to be able to provide some further information and thoughts. So thank you for being with us. Ka kite.